Hi, I'm Bill Steele. I'm co-director of Proyecto Espeleologico Sistema Huautla, PESH we call it, and this is a recap of our 2016 expedition. We'll talk about the science. Speleology is the overall science of caves. It's got a whole bunch of sub-studies within it, subfields, and those would be biology and geology and paleontology and archaeology and so forth. So when we organized PESH 3 years ago, one of our long-term objectives is to support all aspects of speleology. And for the most part, we're doing that through Mexican scientists. If permits are necessary, and they are for biology or paleontological collections, or even rock specimens, if there was a need to do that to analyze geologic structure or maybe the age of the caves, they get the permits. In the case of biology, they issue the permits. They can issue themselves a permit. So third expedition in a row now, we have had biologists from UNAM, the largest, most prestigious university in Mexico City. And over the last 2 years, they have been very excited. They've been there with their professor, Oscar Franke, who is also like the leading world authority on scorpions. And we established a relationship with him some years ago when we found the first troglodytic scorpion ever found, meaning cave adapted. Blind, no skin pigmentation. Its ancestors have lived in a cave for many generations. This year he didn't come. He had some health issues. He wasn't able to come, but 4 of his graduate students did. They made collections. We don't know yet the significance of their collections. But we do know that in the last 2 years, in the 2014 and 2015 expeditions, they found over a dozen new species of arachnids, spiders, and scorpions. Now that sounds like a terrible thing, but I don't see them. They're trained to know where to look. And I can walk down a cave passage and just not see it. But they turn things over, they find them, and then they're new species. With scorpions, it's real important because, and I learned this from Dr. Franke, that over 50,000 people a year die of scorpion stings throughout the world, mostly in the Middle East. And if they find a new species of scorpion, it's possible that they can make a new antivenom, and more effective antivenom. So that's real good. Paleontology. 2 years ago, in a cave that we'd seen before in the 80s, we revisited. And now we've remapped it with a more detailed map. We noticed some big bones in there. And it was a little puzzling at first how they got there, because they didn't get there the way we did. So all we can surmise is that 12 to 15,000, maybe even 20,000 years ago, there was an entrance above this big room in the cave. And it's now gone. It's collapsed, and there's no evidence at all on the surface that it was ever there. But it was there then. And it appears to have been like a natural trap, where if an animal was grazing or eating leaves off a tree too close to the entrance and slipped, in it went and fell 50 meters to the floor. And then the entrance got closed up through the ages, and the bones remain. So we took a paleontologist with INA. INA is a government agency, and paleontology falls under that government agency. It stands for the National Institute for Anthropology and History. So they control the museums in Mexico and a lot of research. So we had a PhD student join us last year, and we showed him this site, and he got excited and said he'd come back. Well, this year we took him to the site again, and he saw part of a skull sticking out of the dirt on the floor, and he hoped the whole skull was there. Well, the whole skull was there, and it's the only complete skull of the type of sloth, Pleistocene sloth, meaning ice ages, been extinct for at least 12,000 years. It's the only complete skull ever found in Mexico. And he and his professor came this year. His professor's name is Joaquin Arroyo Cabrales, and they gave me this really nice poster of Pleistocene megafauna of Mexico, and it shows the type of sloth. Now, people commonly think of the giant ground sloth, which weighed about 1,000 kilos or 2,000 pounds, but this is the type of sloth whose skull was found in the cave, a complete skull, and it's much more rare than the giant ground sloth, so they told me. And the Latin name for it is Megalonyx jeffersoni, actually named after Thomas Jefferson, who is the person who identified it. So this PhD student in paleontology from Mexico City is just beside himself with this discovery, because that's the sort of thing in that field that makes your career. Oh, you're the guy that found that skull back in 2016. So we're very delighted about this paleontology that's happening in Sistema Huautla. Of course, geology is a big part of speleology, because geology is the reason the cave is there. And something that we've wanted to know for years is the age of the caves. How do you determine the age of the caves? Well, we know that the mountains were uplifted about 60 million years ago, so they're younger than that. How old? Well, there's ways to detect how long the passages have been there, and that is that if you have a stalagmite and you can take a small core sample of it, maybe just a 1/4 inch in diameter, a core sample, it's got rings like the rings of a tree, and those can be analyzed. You can't count them so much like the annual ring of a tree, but you can take an uranium isotope measurement and get a date for the stalagmite. So if you got a stalagmite that is 3 million years old, the passage was there 3 million years ago. So you can say the passage is older than 3 million years old. And then when you have sediments, ancient sediments, the sediments will have pollen in them, which can be dated. So that's a cross-reference with the stalagmite dating. And the sediments are usually younger than the stalagmite. So we didn't manage to get the core sampling done this year because the Mexican geologist that was going to come to do it is a graduate student, and he ended up getting assigned to do something else. So he didn't come. But we did have a Mexican caver there with us who is looking to go back to school to get a PhD. And I saw him last night here in Austin. He lives here in Austin right now. And he's very interested in going to graduate school and doing further geologic work in the Huautla Caves. There was a master's thesis written about the hydrogeology, meaning the subterranean water courses, by an American, one of our main cavers, Jim Smith, some years ago. So this guy would be adding to what Jim Smith's findings were. Another aspect of science that was a big deal this year was we were loaned very precise, very sophisticated, state-of-the-art GPS instruments, and through the graciousness of the companies. And we've already returned them, and we'll be giving them feedback. But the feedback's going to be good, because we know that our readings were so precise that they were within centimeters from of course, orbiting satellites. Why is that important? GPS doesn't work underground. It doesn't work when there's a ceiling above, but it sure works at the entrances. So when you've got 20 entrances and the whole survey underground is tied to the location of those entrances, you want to make sure the entrance locations are as precise as can be. And then you can correct your survey because you've got these loops. And anytime you got a loop, you can correct your survey because you know this survey station that came down through this cave is the same survey station as this survey station came down through this cave. So if there's a little bit of distance between them, a little bit of error, you can use a sophisticated computer program to say that should be the same station, and it goes whoop, and it detects or averages out where the error is. Actually, it detects where the mistake probably was and corrects it. It's incredibly sophisticated. Created by David McKenzie of Austin, Texas, a caver who has gone on to be quite the computer programmer. So we're real pleased with the success of the GPS readings this year. And it's even adjusting the depth of the cave a little bit, and we added a little depth to the cave in that we work where the highest entrances are that we hadn't seen in 30-some years. We hadn't gotten back up there. It was all different. Where there had been cornfields before, there's trees growing now, and vice versa, and so forth. Where there was no people living before, now there's people living, and so on. But we were successful in finding a couple of new entrances way up on that ridge, which haven't connected to the system yet, but will add some depth. So I will predict that next year, after next year's expedition, we explore those two caves, that the Sistema Huautla will, number one, probably go over a mile in depth, which has always been a goal of American speleologists my whole life, a mile deep cave. But if you're thinking metrically, like the rest of the world, it will probably go to the point where it'd be the 7th or the 6th deepest cave in the world. Right now it's the 8th deepest cave in the world, sort of at that spot. So the GPS part of the expedition was a real success.